So, you're thinking about picking up The Way of Kings. The real question is simple. Is this actually worth the time, or is it one of those books you start and never finish? Because this thing is huge. Over 1,000 pages, multiple characters, a completely unfamiliar world, and honestly, it doesn't exactly ease you in. In fact, it almost feels that the book starts more than once. You get an opening scene, then another perspective, then another shift before the story really settles. And if you're not used to big fantasy like this, that can feel confusing straight away. This is a book that people call a masterpiece, but it takes its time setting the stage. And if you're anything like me and not long started your reading journey, that's not always easy to push through, even if it's a masterpiece to many. So in this video, I'm going to break down exactly what it feels like to read, where it really shines, where it might lose you, and most importantly, whether this is a book you should actually commit your time to. Because I nearly didn't, and I would have missed out if I hadn't. At its core, The Way of Kings is epic fantasy on a massive scale. It's written by Brandon Sanderson, and it drops you into a completely new world where massive destructive storms shape how people live, fight, and survive. You follow three main characters, each opening a different door into that world. Kaladin, he is a soldier who's lost everything and is trying to find a reason to keep going. Shallan is stepping into a world of scholars and secrets that she's not fully prepared for. And Dalinar, he is a powerful leader, but he's starting to question whether the ideas of honor that he's built his entire life are actually true. And if that all sounds like a lot, that's because it is. But here's the key thing to understand. This isn't a story where everything clicks quickly. It's more like you're learning how the world works at the same time the characters are trying to figure out their place in it. So if you're expecting a clear, simple setup early on, this might feel overwhelming. But if you're open to discovering things gradually, piece by piece, that's when it starts to become really engaging. Let's talk about what I think is the hardest part of this book, because this is where most people will decide whether they will continue or not. The beginning. It is confusing. You're introduced to new terms, different perspectives, and a world that doesn't stop to explain itself straight away. And I remember thinking, am I supposed to understand all of this right now? The answer is no. You're not supposed to understand everything straight away, and I think that's intentional. The book feels designed so things only start making sense over time. But I know that doesn't automatically make it easier, especially if you're newer to reading. It can feel like you're missing something, like you're reading it wrong. This is where I almost stopped, thinking I was ambitious reading this book so early into my reading journey, that I had got caught up in the hype, and that this book was not the one I was ready for. Fortunately, what changed it for me was shifting how I was reading. Instead of trying to understand the world, I focused on the characters. And I think that's where this book quietly hooks you. Kaladin's story pulled me in first. Watching someone try to rebuild themselves after being knocked down again and again, that's something you don't need fantasy experience to connect with. And once you're invested in the characters, something interesting happens. The confusion starts to fade, not all at once, but gradually. You begin to recognize terms, you understand how things connect, the world starts to feel familiar instead of overwhelming. There's a point in this book where everything shifts, and once it clicks, it's hard to stop reading. For me, the biggest strength is how everything builds over time, and how I learned to trust in Brandon Sanderson. If there was something from 300 pages back I forgot, misunderstood, or overlooked, he cleverly found a way to remind me of what I needed to know when I needed to know it, and sometimes almost in a way that made me feel clever for having connected some dots, even though it was Brandon who had got me there subtly and artfully throughout the story. Nothing feels rushed, small moments matter, and when things start paying off, they really land. Again, I think the character work is what carries this. Each main character feels like they're on a genuine journey, not just moving the plot forward. Kaladin's arc is the standout one for me. It's not just what happens to him, it's how he processes it, how he keeps going when it would be easier to give up. And as someone who is just dipping their toe into epic fantasy, having relatable characters to hold on to made a huge difference. I didn't need to understand every detail of the world to care about what was happening. The world building also starts to shine more the further you go. Not because it gets simpler, but because it becomes familiar. For example, even things like how people prepare for storms or different terminology used between different groups start to feel natural rather than confusing. You're not being told how the world works, you're experiencing it through every page. And then there's the pacing in the second half. Once everything is set up, the story builds momentum in a way that makes it very hard to put down. The famous Sanderlanche. This is where the page count becomes almost irrelevant. Because you're no longer reading to figure things out. You're reading because you genuinely want to know what happens next. And that's why, for me, it didn't feel like 1,000 pages. This is where you need to be honest with yourself. If you're the kind of reader who needs clarity early to be in a familiar world and the only thing you're having to understand is the characters to stay engaged, this book might lose you before it rewards you. It takes its time to get going. There is action, don't get me wrong, but it isn't constant. And not everyone will want to push through that. There's also, as you would expect, a lot happening throughout the book. Multiple perspectives, different storylines, and a steady flow of new information. If that kind of density feels overwhelming rather than exciting, this could be a difficult read. And in terms of pacing, again, this isn't constant action. I would say most of this book is slower, focused on character decisions, conversations, and small moments that build into something bigger. So, if you're expecting something fast and intense from start to finish, this probably won't meet that expectation. On the other hand, this will work for you if you enjoy character-driven stories that take their time, if you like the idea of gradually understanding a world rather than having everything explained up front, and especially if you're trying to get into reading and want something that feels like a step up without being impossible. If you're anything like me, this is the kind of book that feels challenging at first, but rewarding once you're into it. But if you want something quick, simple, and immediately gripping, this might not be the one for you right now. We have arrived at the ultimate question then. Is The Way of Kings worth your time? Yes, if you give it the space to unfold. Because once it clicks, this becomes one of the most rewarding reading experiences I've had. It's immersive, character-driven, and genuinely hard to put down. It won't work for everyone, but if it does work for you, it really delivers. For me, this is one of those books that made reading feel both rewarding and exciting. Not because it was easy, but because it showed me just how good epic fantasy can be.